Here's the thing most people don't realize. The biggest warnings in life don't show up like alarms. They don't crash into your world, wave red flags, or shout in your face. They show up quietly, softly, almost politely, and because they're quiet, you convince yourself they're nothing. You shrug them off. You say things like, "It's not a big deal," or "I'm probably overthinking," or the classic, "Maybe it's just me." But it's not just you. Those tiny shifts you feel, they're real. Maybe it's the way your energy changes around someone. Maybe it's the sudden hesitation before you say something. Maybe it's the small sense of pressure you can't explain. These signs don't hit you all at once. They collect, they build, they stack on top of each other until one day you look back and go, "How did I miss that? It was right there." The truth is, when we like someone, trust someone, or hope they'll be good for us, we naturally soften our vision. We want to see the best. We want things to work. And that's exactly why quiet warnings slip through so easily. So today, we're shining a light on those signs, the 7 subtle warnings most people only notice after they've already been hurt. And once you recognize them, you won't unsee them again. Let's start with the first one, the one that sneaks in earlier than anything else. The first warning is one most people don't even recognize as a warning, not because it's subtle, though it is, but because it feels so normal when it's happening. The first warning is this: you start explaining yourself way more than you should. And it doesn't begin dramatically. There's no explosion, no confrontation, no big moment that suddenly shifts everything. It starts quietly. It starts with you saying something simple, and them responding in a way that makes you feel like you need to clarify. Maybe they look confused. Maybe they get slightly offended. Maybe they throw in a comment like, "What do you mean by that?" And suddenly, you're breaking down your intentions like you're testifying in court. At first, you tell yourself it's normal. You think, "Okay, maybe they misunderstood me," or "I just want to make sure we're on the same page." And that seems harmless, right? But here's the quiet shift. The moment you start explaining who you are, what you meant, or why you think a certain way, repeatedly, it means something in the dynamic is off. You're not being listened to. You're being interpreted, judged, measured. And when someone makes you feel like you need to defend your tone, your choices, or your feelings, you start to change without realizing it. You become more careful with your words. You pre-edit your thoughts before speaking. You soften your reactions so you won't have to justify them later. You begin walking around your own personality like it's something that might cause trouble. And here's the heartbreaking part people only notice afterward. You weren't trying to communicate better. You were trying not to be misunderstood. There's a difference, a big one. And long before you ever get hurt, this is often the very first sign that something is draining you. But you don't see it until much later. And if you think that's subtle, the next warning is even trickier, because it doesn't feel like a warning at all. In fact, it feels like the opposite. Ready for it? This one catches people off guard because it feels good at first. The second warning is this: they praise you, but not for who you actually are. They praise you for things that don't matter, or for versions of you that don't exist yet. It starts with compliments that sound deep, but don't actually connect to your real self. They say things like, "You're going to be amazing one day. You have so much potential. You're different from everyone else. You're going to be huge. I can just tell." Sounds harmless, right? But here's where it gets tricky. These aren't compliments about your character, your consistency, your values, or the things you already are. They're praising your possible future, an imagined version of you, a version they created. And when someone is more in love with your potential than your reality, that means they aren't seeing you. They're projecting onto you. At first it feels flattering. It feels like admiration. It feels like someone finally sees something special in you. But slowly, the pressure starts to creep in. You start feeling like you need to live up to this image they've built. You feel guilty if you're tired, insecure, or imperfect. You feel like if you show your real self, your actual weaknesses, your actual pace, your actual life, you'll disappoint them because deep down, you realize it's something important. They don't love you. They love the idea of you. And loving an idea is easy. Loving a human is harder. People usually recognize this warning only after they've been hurt, when they look back and think, wow, they never actually knew me. People usually recognize this warning only after they've been hurt, when they look back and think, wow, they never actually knew me. But if you think this one is confusing, the next warning is even more disorienting, because this time, it doesn't feel flattering. It feels unpredictable. And that unpredictability becomes its own trap. The third warning is the one that messes with your head the most, because it has nothing to do with logic and everything to do with emotional rhythm. They switch between warm and cold without warning. One day they're all in, talking to you, complimenting you, acting like they're genuinely connected. The next day, distant, short, dry, unavailable. And the crazy part is, they never explain the shift. They just expect you to adjust to whatever version of them shows up. This is where the emotional whiplash kicks in. Because when someone is warm, your guard drops. You feel safe. You feel close. You feel like, okay, maybe this is going somewhere. Then suddenly, without any reason, they pull back. And your brain goes into overdrive. Did I say something wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I text again? Should I give them space? Are they upset? Are they bored? Did I misread everything? You start chasing clarity instead of receiving it. You start trying harder to win back the warm version of them, as if the warm version was your reward for behaving correctly. That's the trap. You begin to associate effort with affection, approval with connection, and unpredictability with excitement. It becomes addictive, because now you're hooked on the possibility of the warmth returning, even though the cold is what's actually consistent. But here's the real warning. If someone can flip their energy like a switch, it means their connection to you isn't grounded. It's convenient. And once you get used to chasing that emotional stability, the next warning becomes almost invisible, because you start bending over backwards just to keep the peace. The fourth warning is subtle, but it hits deep. You start apologizing for things you didn't even do wrong. At first, it's small. A quick sorry for interrupting, for speaking up, for expressing an opinion. Nothing huge, nothing dramatic, just little micro-apologies that feel polite. But slowly, it grows. You apologize to avoid arguments. You apologize to avoid tension. You apologize just to keep the peace, even when the peace is fake. And here's the catch most people only realize later. You're apologizing not because you're wrong, but because you're afraid of losing them, or upsetting them, or making them uncomfortable. You start to bend yourself around their moods. You edit your words. You filter your reactions. You shrink, piece by piece, to make sure no one gets offended. And before you know it, you're apologizing for existing. This is the kind of warning that's almost invisible when it's happening. You don't notice the small shifts in yourself until you look back and think, wait, why was I constantly apologizing for being me? And here's the thing. When someone makes you feel like you have to apologize for your natural reactions, it's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on the dynamic. And if you think that's subtle, the next warning is even sneakier. Because this time, it's not about what you say or do. It's about what doesn't happen at all. The fifth warning is the one that slips by almost unnoticed because it doesn't feel negative at first. They avoid real conversations. At first, it's little things. Questions you ask are answered vaguely. You try to clarify plans, feelings, or intentions, and they dodge. They're busy, distracted, or suddenly not in the mood. It doesn't feel like a big deal. You tell yourself, maybe they just need space, or maybe it's not the right time. And at first, it isn't. But over time, it becomes a pattern. You realize that important topics never get addressed. Promises aren't clarified. Conflicts aren't resolved. Everything stays in a gray area, undefined, unexplained, unsettled. The subtle warning here? If someone consistently avoids clarity, they're not inviting connection. They're controlling the pace, the direction, and often the emotional energy, leaving you doing all the navigating. And here's the kicker. The avoidance feels harmless until you look back and realize how much mental and emotional space you've been giving them for nothing. And if this one sounds familiar, brace yourself. The next warning is even sneakier because it doesn't feel negative at all in the moment. In fact, it's tied to the good moments themselves and how they leave you feeling afterward. The sixth warning is tricky because it doesn't hit like a punch. It sneaks in, disguised as, well, a good time. You feel drained after good moments. Think about it. You spend time together. Everything seems fine, maybe even great. You laugh. You connect. You feel like it's going somewhere. And then afterward, you're tired, heavy, uneasy. Something feels off, even though it should feel good. This is your body and your mind sending a quiet alert. Even when things look positive, the underlying tension is still there. Your brain knows that peace isn't real. It's temporary. It's a reprieve that comes with a cost. You might brush it off at first. Maybe I'm just overthinking, you tell yourself. But over time, these moments add up. They leave you emotionally exhausted, like you've been carrying more than your fair share of weight. Here's the harsh truth most people notice only later. If you consistently feel drained after someone makes you feel good, the problem isn't with you. It's with the way the relationship is structured. The highs aren't healthy. They're bait. And if this one hits close to home, the next and final warning is the one that seals the deal. It's the quietest, most insidious, and the one you absolutely can't ignore. Ready to hear it? The seventh warning is the quietest, the hardest to see, and the one that hits the hardest. You stop recognizing yourself. At first, it's tiny things. A joke you wouldn't normally laugh at. A hobby you stop mentioning. A part of yourself you start hiding because they wouldn't get it. Then it grows. You monitor your words, your tone, your reactions. You pre-edit everything before you say it. You shrink pieces of your personality just to keep the peace. And before you know it, you don't even feel like you anymore. This is the kind of warning people almost always notice, only in hindsight. They look back and think, I wasn't being myself. I was surviving them. And that's exactly the point. It's survival, not connection. If you feel like you have to erase parts of yourself around someone to make them comfortable, that's not compromise. That's a warning. It's your internal alarm telling you, loudly but quietly, that this dynamic isn't safe for your heart or your identity. And the scary part, once you've crossed this line, everything else, the apologizing, the chasing, the exhaustion, all makes sense in hindsight. Recognizing it early is the only way to stop it, because no one should cost you yourself. Here's the thing. Most of us don't notice these warnings when they're happening. Not because we're blind, not because we're naive, but because these signs are quiet, subtle, and hope is loud. We want to believe the best in people. We tell ourselves, maybe they just had a bad day, or they didn't mean it like that, or the classic, I'm probably overthinking this. And that hope? It's powerful. It clouds your judgment. It makes you see what you want to see instead of what's really there. We miss these quiet warnings because we're invested. We want things to work. We want someone to be kind, consistent, or loving, and so we excuse behaviors we wouldn't normally tolerate. Another reason we miss them is that subtle shifts don't hurt right away. A dismissive comment today, a vague answer tomorrow, a tiny apology for no reason next week. None of it feels like a deal breaker in the moment. And that's why we look back later and go, wow, I should have seen that coming. The reality is, these warnings are like little whispers, not alarms. They're there. You notice them if you pay attention. But most of the time we're too busy hoping, too busy explaining them away, or too focused on the good moments to realize the quiet ones are building a pattern. And here's the kicker. The people who miss these signs the most are the ones who care the most. Caring makes you want to see the best, not the warning. It's human. It's normal. But it's also why reflection later feels so painful. So recognizing why we miss them is just as important as spotting them. Because once you understand the pattern and why your hope was hijacking your judgment, you can start seeing these quiet warnings before they hurt you. Your gut is smarter than you think. It notices patterns, picks up on tiny inconsistencies, and senses tension before you even have the words to explain it. But here's the problem. Most of us ignore it. We brush it off with thoughts like, I'm probably overreacting. I shouldn't be so sensitive. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Sound familiar? You're not alone. We all do it because we want to believe the best in people. We want someone to be consistent, kind, and trustworthy. We want things to work, and that desire often drowns out our internal alarm system. But ignoring it comes at a cost. Your gut is basically sending you a memo. Pay attention. Something's off. The catch: it doesn't give details. It doesn't explain motives. It just signals discomfort. And discomfort is enough, if you notice it. So how do you actually start trusting your gut? Let's break it down. 1. Notice how you feel after interactions. Ask yourself after every conversation or hangout, do I feel energized, calm, excited, or drained, uneasy, or heavy? Your feelings after spending time with someone are more honest than anything they say. For example, maybe they made a joke, complimented you, or seemed perfect in the moment, but afterward you feel tight, tired, or off. That feeling is your gut giving you data. Don't ignore it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Take note. 2. Look for patterns, not single incidents. Your gut speaks in patterns, not isolated moments. One small off comment, probably nothing, but repeated subtle shifts, apologizing unnecessarily, energy drain after good moments, emotional whiplash, all those tiny signals add up. Think of it like a puzzle. Each piece on its own doesn't tell you much. But once enough pieces come together, the picture becomes clear. 3. Write it down. This might sound obvious, but journaling is one of the simplest ways to see patterns you'd otherwise miss. Write down interactions, your reactions, and how you feel. Even just 5 minutes a day can help you notice recurring signs that, in the moment, feel negligible. When you look back weeks later, you'll start to see the truth. Oh, they always do this. I feel drained every time after talking to them. I'm constantly apologizing or justifying myself. Seeing it in black and white takes away the excuse of, maybe I'm imagining it. 4. Don't overthink, but don't ignore. There's a balance to strike here. You don't have to overanalyze every tiny move someone makes, but you do have to pay attention to recurring discomfort, unease, or tension. Your gut will usually tell you something subtle first, before the big warning signs even show up. Now that we've talked about why we miss these quiet warnings and how to trust our gut early, let's get real about what happens when we ignore them. Because here's the thing. Subtle warnings aren't harmless. They might whisper at first, but if you keep ignoring them, they start to take over your life. 1. Emotional exhaustion. Every time you shrug off a small red flag, you're giving away energy you'll never get back. You'll find yourself drained after conversations, drained after interactions, drained even after good moments. All because your body knows something isn't right. And over time, that exhaustion compounds. You start operating in a constant state of stress or anxiety, even when things seem fine on the surface. 2. Lost sense of self. Ignoring subtle warnings is how people slowly start to lose themselves in relationships or friendships. You bend to fit someone else's moods. You filter what you say. You apologize for things you don't need to. You shrink your personality just to maintain peace. And before you know it, you don't recognize yourself. You look back and wonder, was that really me? Did I really act like that? That loss of self is a cost that hits hardest when it's already too late to notice. 3. Repeated heartbreak. When you ignore subtle patterns, you train yourself to accept them. You get used to apologizing unnecessarily. You get used to emotional whiplash. You get used to being drained after good moments. And this sets up a cycle. The next person who behaves similarly, you might miss the signs again. Ignoring early warnings today can mean repeating the same heartbreak tomorrow. 4. Missed opportunities for better connections. Every minute you spend ignoring the quiet warnings is a minute spent investing in someone who isn't healthy for you. That's energy, time, and emotional bandwidth you could have given to relationships that actually uplift you. Healthy people notice patterns, communicate openly, and make you feel safe. Toxic or inconsistent people do the opposite, and ignoring the early warnings delays your chance of finding someone who actually fits. 5. Regret. The hardest cost is hindsight. Looking back and realizing the signs were there all along. It's a punch in the gut. I should have seen it. I should have trusted my gut. I gave too much, and it cost me myself. Regret doesn't just hurt emotionally. It sticks with you, shaping your trust, your confidence, and even your ability to connect in the future. The cost of ignoring these quiet warnings isn't subtle. It's emotional exhaustion, self-doubt, heartbreak, missed opportunities, and long-term regret. The good news? None of this has to happen if you start paying attention. If you start trusting yourself early, noticing patterns, and protecting your energy. Because the truth is, seeing these signs before it hurts you isn't just about avoiding pain. It's about preserving who you are, your energy, your confidence, and your ability to build healthy relationships that actually last.